Sensitive readers. This became a bit of a topic recently in my sphere of interest as Games Workshop, the creators of 40k, decided to reiterate a 30-plus year old piece of lore in a Horus Heresy rulebook, which says that only men can be Space Marines, the 40k poster boys. This is not controversial, as mentioned, it's 3 decades of established lore, and never has GW even so much as hinted at the presence of non-male Space Marines. But 40k is currently under attack by a politically motivated movement who gives 0 divided by 2 shits about 40k and its lore. They just want to insert as much of their own worldview into it as possible. And hey, you don't even need to take my word for it, because one of the latest attempts to do this was a thoroughly ineffective petition demanding that GW hire sensitive readers, so as to ensure that the heavy, quotation marks, fans aren't offended by the lore of the universe they are fans of. Clown world idiocy aside, let us investigate why the demand for sensitive readers has arisen, starting of course with the obvious question, what is a sensitive reader? Beyond the obvious, I mean, a person that has found a quick payday in preying upon the current year cultural paradigm? Okay, let's try and enter into this with as open a mind as possible. The most general definition / description I have found explains that a sensitive reader is a person who, quote, reviews unpublished manuscripts with the express purpose of spotting cultural inaccuracies, representation issues, bias, stereotypes, or problematic language, end quote. With the presumed intent, of course, being to avoid any of these problematic things, so as to, in turn, avoid the oh-so-frequent outpourings of hate from the compassionate side of politics. Really, the fact you need to pay a protection fee to check your script for anti-party rhetoric or have people show up in front of your house should tell you everything you need to know, but let us ignore reality for a moment and instead investigate the various parts of that description. Anyone who has even the most passing of familiarities with aforementioned paradigm and the modern-day lingo of the radical left will immediately spot practically the whole gambit of buzzwords and non-terms included in that definition. Cultural inaccuracies. That's an interesting term. Not historical inaccuracies, mind you, cultural, as in inaccurate to current year interpretation of culture. Let me demonstrate. A movie coming out later this year is The Woman King. I know, retarded title as a female ruler is a queen, not a king, but ignore that for a second. And the fact that the story isn't actually even about a female ruler, but details. The pre-release hype for the movie has been universally positive and presents a progressive African kingdom, Dahomey, with its elite unit of female warriors fighting against colonial oppression as the evil Europeans are trying to destroy their way of life. Which is entirely true, as the Europeans were trying to outlaw the slave trade. Which King Gezo of Dahomey, played by John Boyega, by the way, described as, quote, the slave trade is the ruling principle of my people. It is the source and the glory of their wealth. The mother lulls the child to sleep with notes of triumph over an enemy reduced to slavery, end quote. And the Amazons? They were the king's wives and terror troops. His chief slave catchers and policing force, because any man who put a hand on a wife of the king was punished with execution. A very handy enforcement strategy. You can see how cultural accuracy deviates a pinch from that damned awfully inconvenient history. I am looking forward to the movie, if you couldn't guess. The next one, quote, representation issues. The literal definition of an issue is a matter that is in dispute between 2 or more parties. In other words, it is a personal opinion that is likely to be in varying degrees of conflict with someone else's personal opinion. For example, Hiring people for a job based solely on the color of their skin sounds to me like a pretty clear-cut case of discrimination along racial lines, whilst for others, that's called a representation. And then we have bias. Oh, don't make me laugh. The two previous points illustrate the hypocrisy of it plenty well enough. Much the same with stereotypes. And finally, of course, the Old Faithful, the heavy lifter in the wokest dictionary, problematic language, which can best be described as anything and everything that isn't actually incorrect or wrong, but may run contrary to the currently prevailing line of generally accepted dogma. And erring on the wrong side of that dividing line can turn a hero into Hitler with the press of a tweet button, as most famously seen with J.K. Rowling. And just in case you think I'm reading too much into it, being too interpretive, we might say, in attributing most of these things to the current year culture warrior movement of the SJWs, let us go back in time a bit to what started a lot of the push for sensitive readers. In 2013, a fantasy book called The Continent was released in an early access version to a handful of readers. After initially favourable reviews of the pre-released version, Twitter discovered the book, and the now traditional barrage of radical left compassion began streaming in. Rape, death threats, the usual. Deciding that paying protection money was a preferable alternative, the author hired a political censor to go through the book, also today called a sensitive reader. This person was hired to point out that the author's fantasy savages used bows and arrows, and were thus clearly meant to be a racist stereotype of Native Americans. This came as a complete surprise to the author, but self-evidently she had no idea what she herself had written. And so the red pen of censorship came out to fix the problem. After that, a lot of people started seeing a lot of profits as a problem had been created, and now the selling of the solution could commence. Many leapt on the bandwagon, including a fairly current-day influential organization called We Need Diverse Books. This is a non-profit organization which, like most businesses of its kind, is enormously profitable. According to the sources I could dig up, they have gotten over $1 million in donations, and according to their own site, only offered up 34 grants at $2,000 each since 2015. If my math is correct, that's $68,000. They also offer some other grants with no numbers attached and various services and mentorships for up-and-coming writers. Oh, well, there's a bit of a qualifier there. You see, only to writers of the correct skin color. You must also, by the way, be born right to be able to receive a grant for them as well, as is only natural. But whilst on the topic of money, I would never be so bold as to speculate where the other $1,265,593 have gone. I would just point out that non-profit doesn't mean the employees don't get handsomely compensated for their time. It just means the company doesn't pay any taxes. As for what they specifically do, well, as mentioned, they offer a few grants here and there, and writing tips focused primarily on pushing radical leftist politics in schools, of course, with this line being particularly Marxist in nature. Quote, form an equity inclusion committee, including diverse parents to guide school-wide efforts to provide an inclusive and honors curriculum, as well as equitable academic opportunities and discipline procedures, end quote. And as we know from the organization's grants only being given to authors of the correct color, diverse here simply means no whites allowed. So they are arguing for racial collectivist committees to be formed in school to make sure the curriculum is sufficiently racially oriented. And of course, as you probably noticed, all of this language is very similar to that previously used definition/explanation of what a sensitive reader is. It should come as no surprise either that this is one of the primary organizations pushing for the introduction of sensitive readers. And my point, of course, being that there is no separating the sensitive reader from the overt idea of modern-day radical politics, as the things they are sensitive for and explicitly tell you they are going to be looking for are viewed through a purely progressive lens. But hey, maybe that's the point. Perhaps rather than sensitive reader, a more apt term might be, as mentioned, political commissar. A loaded term, mayhaps, but bearing in mind that the main point of a sensitive reader appears to be to proofread for progressive dogma, it sure as hell fits. And if, for the low price of $500 to $750 per novel, you can protect yourself against the screeching Twitter mob ruining your career and sending activists to your house, then much like a quick monthly deposit to stop a wayward brick from crashing through your window, it may very well be worth it. After all, when in Little Sicily, do you like the Sicilians? Here's the fly in the ointment, however. Every diversity hire, sensitive reader, I have found always expressly makes it clear that they can only ever speak from their own lived experience and personal point of view. Reasonable enough, to be sure, but when you're trying to outrage-proof your script, well, the list is long indeed. Sexism, homophobia, racism, ableism, ageism, transphobia, hell, even the isms and phobias barely make a dent in the list, as even if you don't ism anybody, you still need diversity, representation, inclusion, equity, yada 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 yada. Hell, even the skin color of the author is an issue now in 2022. You would need a battalion of red pencils to have even a kulak's chance in Soviet Russia of covering all the possible ways in which someone could take offense at your book. At best, an extra editor of the correct shade and political orientation is a placebo. An expensive one at that. At worst, they are a political censor hired by an author's simple fear of the mob. Let us also, though, in the name of the most charitable interpretation possible, address the idea of authenticity and how it might add to a work, because there is a theoretical, benefit there. Flipping it around again to 40k, it is the last setting that needs a sensitive reader, as the entire point of 40k is grim dark. It is supposed to be uncomfortable, unnerving, and disturbing. I was only half joking when I said on Twitter the only use for a sensitive reader in 40k was to take note of when they were curled up in the fetal position crying, and then double whatever they were reading. But let us say you were writing a story about, say, the slave perspective right after the American Civil War. Okay, a bit of a story of hope, of a brighter future, an exit from darkness kind of stuff, right? So you need the authentic perspective to portray it properly and respectfully. Perhaps in such a case, a PC spell checker might be useful. Well, again, here's the issue though. A black person could tell you what it's like to be black, I guess, but as not a whole lot of people from the mid-1800s are alive anymore, being black is about all the perspective they can really give, as slavery is not a frequent occurrence in the US of A these days, after all. You might have better chances heading off to the Middle East than asking one of the de facto indentured servants working on a certain football arena, for example, if you wanted an authentic slave's perspective of things. And really, if authenticity is what you want, historical authenticity, mind you, perhaps consider hiring a researcher odds are you will get a much more worthwhile result. But let us not kid ourselves. As we mentioned previously, the sensitive reader wasn't proofreading for historical inaccuracies, it was cultural inaccuracies. And the point, of course, which we return to again unavoidably, conclusively, is to avoid outrage. And even the success rate in doing so is dubious at best, whilst the harm done is unavoidable because it is censorship. Even if done with the best of intentions to avoid offence, as if that was some sort of virtue, the fact is that some of the best art made, be it visual, literary, or audible, is provocative. Take George Orwell for one. Animal Farm in 1984. Absolute classics. Everyone would agree, and far from comfortable reads. I gotta tell you a bit of a side story here. My grandmother, sweetest woman you would ever meet, bought me at the tender age of, I think, 9 or 10 or so, Animal Farm. Because, hey, it had pretty pictures of animals on the outside, and it had such a nice name too, Animal Farm. Clearly, this was a children's book. It traumatized my ass. I still remember the part where they sold the horse for glue. It was something, to be sure, and again, it is good, in large part because of the provocative theme it brings up. Or other examples, like A Clockwork Orange, or American History X, or the entire genre of punk music. If you sanitize everything to the point of complete non-offense, all you are left with is a bland paste. Taking it back again to the point of 40k, if you take the grim dark out of 40k, if you make it progressive, if you make the Imperium into a modern day human empire, you won't have 40k anymore. A self-evident and undeniable truth, but again, of course, as we know and have seen once more today, it was never about the offense taken or the problematic content. It is about the deviation from dogma, the sole singular reason why extremists argue for female space marines and not male sisters of battle is because it's their politics. And sensitive readers, they know, are their political commissars. And that is what a sensitive reader truly is. As you're not going to be finding a conservative sensitive reader anytime soon. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.